Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, guys. I want to completely associate myself with Mr. Kinzinger's remarks from start to finish. First of all, you did a fantastic job, and I wish you were here under circumstances that were different. But here we are. We've had maybe 2.5 years in which there was such a thing as the Trump administration that was resisting Trump. And I don't think there is an administration anymore. We have a president who's acting on his impulses. And the policy of the United States right now is that Syria is not our problem. That's what he said. There's just a bunch of sand, and they can all play in their sand. It is now the official policy of the United States that Russia hates ISIS as much as the US does, and that the PKK is a bigger threat than ISIS. These are all things that the president said today. Anyone who wants to assist Syria in protecting the Kurds is good with me. Russia, China, Napoleon Bonaparte. This is our policy, and we know the second, third, fourth order consequences can be catastrophic. I'm a bit less worried right now about Turkey massacring the Kurds because we know what's happened. The Kurds have struck their alliance with the Assad regime and with the Russians, and that will provide some protection. I'm more worried about the Assad regime now moving into eastern and northern Syria, which is populated not just by Kurds. I'm worried about the inevitability, I think, of Turkey now deciding that in order to deal with its security problems, it no longer has any interest in dealing with us because it's not our problem. They're going to be dealing with the Russians and with Iran. We saw Putin was in the UAE and Saudi Arabia telling them, I'm sure we know what he was saying, you can't trust the United States, but I have some things that I will offer to you, and you know that I will act in defense of our interests. And I think worst of all, he's a step closer to getting the world he wants, a world with no values, no norms, no rules, a world where powerful countries and leaders can do what they want to whomever they want. America, you go do your thing, Russia can do its thing. And that makes me incredibly sad, and I wonder what can we do about it. And I'm struggling with certain things. One question is, do we as a Congress push for maintaining some troops in Syria? I have a bipartisan bill that was relevant a few days ago. I don't know if it's still relevant. It basically says you can't go below 1,000 in Syria unless you can report back to the Congress the answers to certain obvious questions, the questions we've been talking about here. Is that still a relevant approach? And I'd also like to ask you both about our relationship with Turkey. There's a lot of sentiment right now that we need to punish Turkey hard for what it did, and I hate what Turkey did. It was despicable. But I also worry a little bit that we are obsessing right now over punishment of Turkey because we want to absolve ourselves of a decision that President Trump made, and frankly, to be nonpartisan here, to absolve ourselves of mistakes that we made in the Obama administration as well. It's very convenient to say that this is all now the fault of one country that did a terrible thing rather than looking at ourselves. And so I wonder what your advice would be on those two questions. On troops, is there something the Congress can and should do? And on Turkey, is it actually wise to sanction Turkey severely for doing something that the president told them that they could do? If we are ceding the Middle East to Russia, is it in our interest really to pull out of Incirlik now and potentially cede a NATO ally to Russia as well? What should we do?
So thank you, Congressman. I think they're both very relevant questions right now. I would say that, look, had we negotiated a security mechanism or safe zone with Turkey, which Ambassador Jeffrey was in the process of doing right before the decision to end that and to withdraw, presumably we would have taken our troops and perhaps moved them south, we would have continued activities south of that buffer zone or security zone. And so, in theory, there isn't a reason we can't do that now. My question would be, because security for American forces was largely being provided by the SDF, we had a very small number of troops, as you know, Congressman, working with the SDF. If the SDF itself has left these areas and the regime has moved in, is there really an environment in which we can work? I don't know the answer to that question. I think it is a question that Congress has to ask DOD and get a clear answer to, hopefully in the days to come. On the question of Turkey, look, I think that we need to recognize, as many of you already have, that the seeds of this crisis were sown when we made this decision to work with the YPG Kurdish militia, knowing that it was considered a grave security threat by Turkey. We apparently, as you said, Congressman, gave Turkey the green light to do this. So the administration has said that we didn't, but it doesn't seem like there was opposition to the idea. I think we have to take these things into account in our response to Turkey. My own view is that we should be now trying to shape Turkish actions, using sanctions or the threat of sanctions, not to punish Turkey, but to try to lay down sort of some conditions or red lines for Turkey, whether it's humanitarian access, whether it's limiting their incursion, whether it's, again, severing their links with some of these extremist proxies that they seem to be using. And if we do need to use sanctions, to use them in a way which is sufficiently strong that it will cause Turkey to really reconsider some of these actions. There is, I think, this overall question now hanging over the U.S.-Turkish relationship, especially because of Turkey's apparent targeting of U.S. troops. That's not behavior which is sort of compatible with this NATO alliance that we have. And so I think there will be a long-term cost, for sure, to the U.S.-Turkish relationship. But in the sort of the near-term question of sanctions, I would say use them to shape, not punish.
The Syria Study Group spent a long time thinking about the U.S.-Turkey relationship, and I would just like to highlight and underscore what we did say. We did not call for severing the relationship with Turkey. We acknowledge the links between the PKK, a U.S.-designated foreign terrorist organization in Turkey, and the YPG element of the Syrian Democratic Forces in Syria. And we acknowledge that U.S. support for the SDF was a major irritant in the U.S.-Turkey relationship. We did not call for severing the U.S. relationship with the SDF at this time, and we also did not say that Turkey offered a viable alternative military force to continue the anti-ISIS fight, if not for the U.S. relationship with the SDF. So there were very clear things that we said. At this point, could the threat of sanctions shape some Turkish behavior that would otherwise be very destabilizing? For example, the forcible relocation of certain refugees into areas that are not their homes in Syria. There's reports of atrocities and war crimes being committed by proxies, Turkish-supported proxies. These are things that, well, I don't know the content of the president's phone call with President Erdogan. Clearly, these are things that sanctions may be able to shape. So I would leave it there.